Russia is planning to hold a naval exercise off the Syrian coast. The Russian Defense Ministry said the ships of the country's Black Sea and Baltic fleets will take part in the drill in the eastern Mediterranean. Did not give an exact date for the naval exercise. The Russian Navy has a base in Tartus on Syria's Mediterranean coast. The drill comes against the backdrop of tensions between Moscow and the West over Syria. Western states have threatened to intervene in Syria if necessary. This is while Russia has warned against any military intervention in the Arab country. Russia and the West are also at loggerheads over the deployment of Patriot missiles in Turkey by the U.S. and its Western allies. The Patriots have been deployed along the Syrian border.
We just heard from Press TV, and I'd like to maybe quote also an article from the New York Times dated May 1st, that Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel, said that Israel's strategic situation, what is better than it is better now than it's ever been in many years because its neighbors all face internal turmoil and none pose a conventional threat to Israel. Talking about Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, which were the vanguard of anti-Zionist pro-Palestinian struggle, now are so caught up in internal struggle that in fact it guarantees the stability and expansion of the Zionist settler colony called Israel. I'd like to welcome to our listening audience Johnny Achi from Arab-American Syria, a regular guest to update us on the recent developments in Syria, especially this notion of the red line, the so-called being crossed, or appears the red line is up for debate right now. Welcome, Johnny.
Hello, Dilan. Thanks for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure. We can start right off where you finished at the Israel's statements that they're enjoying their best times. And actually, there was another statement by many officials that they would rather have Al-Qaeda run Syria than the Syrian current regime because they think it's much more dangerous, the Syrian government regime being a resistive power in the region, and to deter Israel from further expanding. We know Israel's expansion policy. Everyone is calling me today about Israel's airstrike into Syria. The fact that I was able to collect that, number one, Israel did not enter Syria's airspace. So even if there was a strike, it was done from probably the Lebanese territory. Israel also has not formally admitted, even they're hinting, but there's no formal admission of carrying out the strike. But most importantly for me is that Syria will not be distracted by Israel's airstrike. We know this is just another distraction, just like the weapon of mass destruction and the chemical weapons. Syria is fighting a formidable enemy on the ground, and it will not take its eyes off that enemy. Syria is making tremendous gain on the ground against the insurgency, which we'll talk about in a minute. Who are they? And United States, NATO, Israel is trying to distract Syria, trying to take their eyes off that enemy, give that insurgency maybe a moral victory. Syria is massing its troops right now for what we consider to be the ultimate fight in northern Syria against, in Idlib and in Aleppo. And, any move like this by Israel, trying to distract Syria and try to move maybe some troops south to the southern border, that's not going to happen to relieve any pressure off these insurgencies and give them a little relief. That's not going to happen. Syria, by the way, is responding to Israel. They will pick their own time and date of their own choosing to respond, but they are responding by winning this war on terror. They're responding today by giving Israel instruments in Syria and ass-whooping. Okay? So that excuse that Israel hit the strike that Syria was sending weapons to Hezbollah, I'm not an military expert, but I mean, from the geopolitical, from the point of view of Syria, has got its hands full right now on the ground. The last thing on their mind is sending weapons to Hezbollah. The same thing with the weapon of mass destruction and the chemical weapons. By all accounts, including now even in the Western media, the Syrian Arab army has turned the tide and is overrunning the NATO's Al-Qaeda proxy across the whole country. Okay, including areas that are considered to be rebel held. And the northern part of Idlib, which is on the border of Turkey, they have made stunning victories in the last few days. Despite that area's proximity to NATO member Turkey, okay, which is openly shipping torrents of weapons, cash, terrorists over the border. Now, let's talk about the insurgencies. We're talking about based on Lakhdar Ibrahim, who actually just resigned as the UN envoy to Syria. And the reason he resigned, because he's talking about at least 40,000 foreign fighters in Syria. Those foreign fighters, based on Nasser al-Bahraini, were shipped into Syria just like weapons were shipped. They didn't come one at a time. So telling the West, how do you expect me to go on with a peace mission and call for a ceasefire when you are yourself, materializing the conflict? And for the past 2 years, we know that the U.S., UK, France, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, and Turkey have sent billions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into Syria. And this is, of course, not based on me saying it, but this is based on the UK, the Daily Telegraph, a couple of weeks ago. And they also shipped fighters from Chechnya, from Libya, from neighboring Lebanon, Jordan. They were actually shipped alongside with the weapons. They're talking about that Zagreb, the city in Croatia, which is the ex-Yugoslavia. The over 75 plane loads from Zagreb went into Jordan, and from there went into the southern part of Syria. 75, over 3,000 tons of weapons. The New York Times talk about arms lifting to Syria rebels with CIA aid. It talks about at least 160 military cargo flights by Saudi Arabia and Qatar landed in an airport near Ankara. Okay, another tens of thousands of weapons. So we know that the U.S. and the NATO are financing the war in Syria. Now, the last lie or the joke that they're trying to convince us, the public, that these Western leaders they expect us to believe that all this money and all these weapons, the billions of dollars and the thousands of tons of weapons, are going to what they call secular moderate rebels. We talked about this just last week, about terminology, the effectiveness of the U.S. terminology that they use trying to convince you these are freedom fighters, not, terrorists. These so-called secular moderates, I'm going to ask you, if anybody who's listening today, how come Al-Qaeda then managed to come out as the strongest opposition in Syria? How come the Nusra Front, which has officially swore allegiance and pledged loyalty to Ayman al-Zawahiri of Al-Qaeda, is the biggest military, part on the ground in Syria? So the question is, if seven-nation axis is arraying all its resources in the region behind secular moderates, who then is sending or arraying all the resources behind Al-Qaeda? The answer is simple, and it answered the New York Times. The answer is there is never any secular moderate. In fact, the New York Times has now fully admitted that anywhere in Syria, there's nowhere in rebel-controlled Syria is there a secular fighting force to speak of. Okay? So, that's the whole, the idea that we're talking about, is that Syria is right now, the entire opposition in Syria is Al-Qaeda. And they are trying to do one thing, is destroy Syria. Before I forget, Didan, we are having Monday, in 2 days, May 6th, a protest in front of the Turkish consulate. Monday is Syria's and Lebanon's Memorial Day. We commemorate the hanging of hundreds of national activists back in 1916 in Syria and Damascus and Beirut at the same time. But not just to commemorate that, but also to tell today's Ankara's government to stop supporting terrorism in Syria. So we ask everybody who is a peace-loving man to join us to tell, Turkey, stop intervening into Syria, stop sending more mercenaries into Syria, stop robbing Syria's economy, stop destroying Syria's secularism, Syria's secular composition by sending more fanatics and more Islamists into Syria.
Okay, first, once again, that's a demonstration Monday, 3 to 6 p.m. at the Turkish Embassy, 6300 Wilshire Boulevard. I have one last question.
Sure. One
thing I've learned in my experience in the United States and globally is to always analyze and ask the question, whose interest does it serve? And the red flag issue right now is this question of sarin gas chemical warfare in Syria that's allegedly being used by the Syrian government. But when you reflect upon the question, whose interest does it serve? Clearly, the West, United States, and NATO has made it clear that if the Syrian government used quote-unquote chemical warfare, that would be the red line. But of course, the objective of al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, the United Arab Emirates and Turkey is to get the West to do the war because, of course, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, they don't want to send troops into Syria. They know they'll get wiped out. But clearly, given the fact the war's been going on, the civil war or the war with the rebels been going on for 3 years, the Syrian military and, of course, the population clearly supports a stronger military force, or else the rebels, with all the support they receive from throughout the world, would have quickly overthrown the present regime. So clearly the regime has a strong military and popular support. But the question is, who does this notion of chemical warfare, whose interest does it serve? And I'm not seeing one photo, and I monitor the media all the time, one photo, any documentation of victims of sarin by the government, of chemical warfare by the government. And I'm sure Israel or intelligence agencies are trying or working on somehow planting that inside the country as a pretext for the United States and NATO's involvement in Syria. So once again, the question I always ask is, whose interest does it serve the use of chemical warfare in Syria? And clearly to me, logically, just deductive logic, it serves the interests of the rebel forces and these feudalist Islamic regimes wrapped around there, as well as Western imperialism and Islamic Zionism that want to maintain a weak Syria, which when united and strong is a major force to support the Palestinian struggle for liberation.
Exactly. The only evidence of any chemical use, and we talked about this just last week, on March 19, an attack by the terrorists on al-Asal in northern Syria. And Syria demanded an investigation into the event by United Nations. And everyone else agreed. However, we talked about it last week, Britain said, okay, well, we need to send troops into all of United Nations, into all of Syria to relive the experience that Iraq went through with weapons of mass destruction. It is a pretext to intervention, a pretext to invasion. It's luckily in your report that you played before I went on the air with you, Russia is understanding the game. Russia is no longer the Russia of 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Russia is a major player on the world stage today. And I've told the United States after Libya that there will be no more government taking a government out and putting a new government in without, United Nations approval. So NATO is being faced by Russia and China, and they will not allow that to happen in Syria. And Syria is happening. Syria is winning this ground war. I'm telling you, in the next few weeks, you're going to hear some really great news, and it's going to be the end of these insurgencies. I mean, hopefully. Of course, they will always find the reasons to give them more support. Now, United States talking about sending weapons to them, more weapons or less. They've been sending weapons. So let's just stop that, If they really want us for Syria to be over with, they can just stop the borders, stop the influx of mercenaries and terrorists into Syria, and it will be over in a week's time.
Okay, we'd like to thank you once again. We're advocating a political solution where the rebel forces that are Syrian, sit down with the government, work out a political solution, which we believe as anti-imperialists, as believers in political